Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament in Brussels, and in today's programme we'll be looking at the issue of British and EU funding of the Palestinian Authority, particularly to Palestinian prisoners who have been convicted on terrorism-related issues, find themselves in Israeli prisons, are being paid salaries by the Palestinian Authority that's been funded directly by the European Union. So we're looking at how the European Union, and particularly the European Parliament, can confront the issue of incitement to terrorism and violence within Palestinian society. In today's programme, I'm joined by Dafna Friedman, who's the Communications and Campaign Officer for the Europe-Israel Public Affairs. Also, Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, and Michael McCann, who is the director of a brand new organisation in Britain called the Israel-Britain Alliance. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Firstly, I'll ask you, Thomas, what do you make of the situation that we find that EU money, British money, has been given to the Palestinian Authority, that's been given to Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, some of them even suicide bombers, and are paid directly through EU money?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's good to be back on the program. And last week, as you know, we raised this issue specifically with the European External Action Service. And of course, this is disgusting after all these years that this has been substantiated and proofs have been given that this is taking place. Nothing seems to change. And not only that, I think what we discovered last week was that there was a clear ignorance on the issue, and even not being able to acknowledge the facts. And it's for me, it's very difficult to understand after all these years of campaigning, after all these years of making this very clear, it still continues. And it just shows again that all of us here and others, we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Absolutely. Also, you ECI published a report. Can you tell us what is in that report that you sent to the EU External Action Force?
Well, the report is being done together with an Israeli organization and a French NGO, and it basically states three things. One is, as you just mentioned, that payments are still being made to convicted terrorists and murderers. Incitement to hatred is institutionalized in the Palestinian authorities. You see it in their curriculum, and you see it in publicly funded TV programs. And martyrdom is being expressed as something that young children should pursue. And we think all these three things are something which all European taxpayers or anyone of goodwill should see as alarming facts.
Absolutely. And Michael, warm welcome to the European Report. It's good to have you on the programme. Now, your organisation, Israel-Britain Alliance, has been very much involved in a campaign to raise awareness regarding, in your case, British taxpayers' money being used to fund the Palestinian Authority, which in turn is then being used to fund Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. That it's almost on a scale system whereby the higher the number of Israelis killed in acts of terrorism, the higher those salaries are going up. In the case of your work, and you're doing a very successful campaign in the British Parliament regarding this issue, can you let our viewers know the extent of the problem and also the extent of the problem here in the European Union?
Well, you have to break down the British aid programme to understand it. Around 60% of the £12 billion that Britain spends in international development is spent through multilateral organisations like the World Bank, the European Union and the United Nations. So therefore, we are sending money to those organisations who then spend it in places like the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem. But in addition to that, Britain has a bilateral programme with the Palestinian Authority, which roughly spends around £95 million a year. But the crucial thing here is that about 25% of that money goes direct into a World Bank trust fund, along with other donor money, which is then transferred to the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority have complete control over that cash. Now, That money is then used, and the Palestinian Authority are guilty of sleight of hand now, because they shut down the Ministry of Prisoner Affairs in 2014, claimed they were no longer paying prisoners, but then, and miraculously at the same time, a new organisation, the PLO Commission for Prisoners, opened up, and lo and behold, in the same year, their budget was raised by exactly the sum of money which was previously paid to the Ministry of Prisoner Affairs. And you're right, in terms of putting it into pounds and pence, as we would say in the UK, this is a tariff. If you're serving up to 3 years in jail, you are paid £250 a month. If you're serving a sentence of up to 30 years in jail, wait for it, you're getting paid £2,250 per month. Let me put that into perspective for you. If you're a Palestinian Authority civil servant, you're paid £500 a month. So tell me what pays more? Working hard to make a living, to make a contribution to a potentially new Palestinian state, or becoming a terrorist, murdering someone, spending time in jail, and then getting even more money. It's outrageous, it's ridiculous, and it has to stop.
Absolutely. And Dafna, now you're part of the Europe-Israel Public Affairs, you're their communications officer, campaigns officer, and you're also an Israeli as well. So you are doing work here in the European Parliament and the European institutions as well, but you're also an Israeli. So what is your reaction when you know that British and also European aid money is being given to the Palestinian Authority that is raising the next generation of children to hate and incitement towards violence towards your nation and your people?
So as you said, as an Israeli and as somebody that works in APA, I personally don't have a problem that money goes to the Palestinian Authority. We all agree that it's vital for them to get money, for them to build their society, to build infrastructures, to put some effort to their education, and so on and so on. My problem starts when this money, through the Palestinian Authority, finds its way to incitement, finds its way to terror, and as all of you said, finds its ways to support terrorists that are sitting in prison after murdering Israeli civilians. This is something that is unacceptable, and we in APA are trying to bring this issue here at the Parliament trying to bring MEPs to talk about it more, to ask more questions about it, and to not give legitimacy to what's going on. Because right now, some of the money of European citizens that are paying taxes are getting to those kind of violence acts, and it's unacceptable.
No. And Thomas, you've been here working in the European Parliament, the European institutions regarding the issue of incitement to terror and the incitement to violence committed by the Palestinian Authority. Is really preparing the next generation of young Palestinian children to actually hate Israel, or even the worst case, glorify terrorism against Israelis. And you've been doing this for well over a decade. Why do you think that the European Commission are very, very slow to respond to this issue of incitement, and how the EU seems to be turning a blind eye to Palestinian support for terrorism and terrorist organisations?
Well, obviously the civil servants at the European institutions are accountable to their citizens, but primarily to the member state governments. So unless this is an issue which is being raised in all the 28 member states and raised by civil society organizations such as the ones represented here, of course there's nothing that will change in a foreseeable future. And I think it's sad, and it's often pointed out in the European Parliament as well, that we have to make these non-elected officials accountable. They cannot have a policy of their own, and sadly we've seen a number of cases where initiatives are being made on a civil society level in the European Commission, which does not have the backup either of the European Parliament or the member states. So I think that all of us have a task ahead of us to name and shame, to make these institutions who are the officials who are non-elected, they're accountable to us as taxpayers and citizens in the European member states. They need to be accountable, and it only starts by showing reports like we did last week and saying, well, here are the facts, what is your response? And I think it was a good exercise last week just to bring this on the table, and then also to hear the official response saying that, well, this is, incitement is not an issue, we shouldn't be concerned, this is all exaggerated. And it's important to bring this to the table at programs such as this, so all of us are aware of what is at stake. And in a democracy, and we do live in a democracy, we have this opportunity to raise our voices, to contact our members of European Parliament and national parliaments, so we can make a difference.
Absolutely. Michael, I want to bring you on board. So no government, whether it's the British government or whether it's the European Union, for example, would want their money being used to incite, glorify or incentivize Palestinian terrorism. Why do you think there's so much apathy? And surely the better way is to actually support projects that produce better coexistence and reconciliation between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
There are lots of different projects which are available for investment, and they are all better than making any investment in violence. But I agree with Thomas wholeheartedly. It's about accountability. In terms of this place we're in terms of the European Parliament, there is a disconnect between the electorate, the voters in each member country, and their MEPs. And the only way that you make people accountable is by raising issues with them, bringing a different narrative, because far too often the narrative around the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian people and Israel is a false one. People don't know the history. They don't know the history of this fantastic country that's existed since 1948. It gets bad headlines. It gets a bad press regularly. And we who believe in the country, who want to make sure that that success continues, should be shouting out louder about it. And that's why the Israel-Britain alliance is ensuring that the people who support Israel and the Jewish people across the whole of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, those people have been brought together to make their views known to politicians. And I want to spread that word further. I want to make sure we take it to this place in the European Parliament, where we ensure that we work as a coalition of countries in the future, and that we ensure that that narrative of the truth, that narrative which will lead us to a peace in this difficult part of our world, will be made available to politicians. But having been a politician, I know that it's often the case that you want to choose the path of least resistance. And quite frankly, because we haven't been making our voices heard loud enough, then the path of least resistance has been all those people who support an untruthful narrative. We've got to change that dynamic. We can, and we will. And we will force politicians to take realistic and sensible decisions, particularly when it comes to giving aid and succour to terrorism and people who incite and create violence.
Michael, when you were a Labour MP in the British Parliament, you were on the select committee that dealt with the Department for International Development and aid that was going to the Palestinian Authority, because you were part of that committee tour of the Middle East. You met the Palestinian finance minister. You asked him directly, is money going to fund Palestinian prisoners that are being convicted on terrorism charges in Israeli prisons and paying them a salary? And what was his answer? What were your findings that you saw for yourself?
Well, let me tell you, you asked a question to, I think it was Thomas earlier, about what are the problems, and he said, well, you're making this all up, it's all a myth, it's, you're exaggerating. Let me absolutely clear this. As a member of the United Kingdom Parliament, on a delegation from an official select committee of the House of Commons, we met with the Palestinian Authority Finance Minister, Bashara. I asked him this question: do you pay convicted terrorists and criminals a salary every month and they get more if they're spending a longer time in prison? I didn't need to be a super sleuth to get the answer. This was his response: yes, we do. It costs us a lot of money. We would rather not pay it, but politics mean that we have to pay it. It's a political decision on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. So please, any European bureaucrat, any European politician, any British politician, any member country politician who repeats that nonsense, this is exaggeration, it's not true, please direct them back to that answer, because it was unequivocal. They do, it has to stop. And the crucial thing is, there are other ways we can spend that money to take people out of poverty. As you mentioned earlier, there are fantastic coexistence programs between Israelis and Palestinians. They'll build peace, they'll build bridges to peace. At the moment, we're funding terrorism, which is never going to be a foundation for an end to the violence in this difficult part of our world.
Yeah. And Dafna, I know that you and many other Israelis would have been celebrating only a couple of weeks ago Israel's independence, Yom Ha'atzmaut, 68 years reborn as a nation. And today Israel is an economic powerhouse in the Middle East. And if we then compare that to the amount of aid money that the Palestinian Authority has received through the World Bank, through the EU, through the US government, we realise that actually it's more money given to the Palestinian Authority was given than the Marshall Aid Plan after World War II to build the entire continent of Europe again after the years ravaged by war during World War II. What does this say about the corruption within the Palestinian Authority, and how important is it that we raise issues to do with abuse of Palestinian human rights by the Palestinian Authority?
That's really important questions. I think when you look at the Palestinian money they received a lot of money up until now, and nowadays they're still receiving a lot of money. And the question that almost nobody is asking is, where is the money? Where is the money?
Question.
And when you go to those places and you look at them, all you can see is poverty. You can see people living bad condition. Some of them don't even have houses. Some of them don't even have electricity or running water or anything at all. And this question needs to be raised. Where is the money? So there is two things. One of them you were talking about earlier, the fact that people don't have money, and that some of the aid money goes to fund people that are actually taking acts of terror against Israelis, create a vicious cycle of violence. Because if somebody doesn't have a way to bring food for his family at home, he will prefer then to go kill some Israelis, sit in the prison, and get some money for his family. And it's clear fact. I mean, some of them don't even do it for ideology. And the second thing is, as you mentioned, the corruption, because we all saw the last report about Abu Mazen building a house with over $7 million worth house. And you look at those things and you don't know how to react to that. And we here in Europe should find a way to make sure that our money goes to the right cause. Our money goes to build, not to destroy.
Absolutely. And Thomas, when we look at the issue of Palestinian incitement and hatred to violence, this has really been here since the start of the peace process back in 1993 between the Israelis and the Palestinians, when Yasser Arafat took control first of Gaza and then Jericho, and then later other towns and cities in Judea and Samaria, which then has become part of the Palestinian Authority. So this issue has really been there. So we've seen a whole generation of young Palestinians brought up on this daily diet of incitement and hatred towards Israel. Surely Europe can learn something about its own history of the dangers of incitement and hatred when we look at the Nazi regime in the 1930s to realise the full consequences. But in your opinion, what are the dangers if we and Europe ignores this issue?
I often quote JFK, who I think said that peace doesn't start with a signature on a piece of paper. It starts in the hearts or minds of people, as I believe was the case also in Northern Ireland, the peace agreement there. And obviously what we see in European history is that we often talk about the Holocaust as almost as it would have started overnight when at the Wannsee conference, when Hitler decided to annihilate all the Jews. But obviously historians would say it started much, much earlier. It started with words. It started with demonization. And that's why this is so, incitement is such an important element on, how are we preparing for the future? And that's why we are so strong at saying, as long as there is incitement, we don't see any prospect for a sustainable peace. And that's why we need to continue to be strong on this issue. And just as a side note, some of us noted in a public debate here in this European Parliament last week that a prominent member of European Parliament referred to Israelis as a disease, as a rash. And I think that's quite remarkable, and it's almost unheard of. It's something you can hear on the streets in Europe, in the bad neighborhoods. But in the European Parliament, to make reference to Israelis in this despicable way, I think it's also a sign that something is not right in the discourse.
Yeah. Michael, we're down to the last 5 minutes, so I've got two parts of my question. The first thing is, how possible is it that the European Union would actually adopt the Canadian model to make sure there are proper accounts to show where EU aid money is being spent and being used, so there's a proper accountancy system set up? And secondly, what can our viewers who are watching this programme today, concerned about how EU and British aid money is being used by the Palestinian Authority to incite, to hate and to glorify terrorism, what can they do about it?
First part, we don't need to adopt the Canadian model. We already have the mechanisms to resolve this, and I'll tell you what they are. The British money, the British aid that is given to the Palestinian Authority, and it will be the same as the European Union money, is governed by a memorandum of understanding. That memorandum of understanding commits the Palestinian Authority to non-violence. It has demonstrably been broken because they are paying convicted prisoners, and they are creating incitement. It's beyond peradventure. It's there for everyone to see. So the British government stopped aid to Rwanda because Paul Kagame was suspected of paying or supporting the M23 terrorists in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We stopped aid in Malawi when Joyce Banda's officials were deemed to be corrupt. We've stopped aid even in the suspicion of wrongdoing. Now, it's beyond doubt that this is taking place, so the British government should intervene with a very simple ultimatum to the Palestinian Authority, and the EU should do the same. Stop using money for violence. Commit to exclusively peaceful methods of resolving your political problems, and there will be no problem with money flowing to the poorest people to help you build a new nation. That's the first thing. In terms of how we change opinions, people have to engage in politics. It's a message, I've been taking home to people across Britain and Northern Ireland, and they are coming forward in huge numbers to support us. The support is there, and we have to take the same message to people across Europe, that just because certain groups shout loudest, that doesn't mean to say that they have the best argument. We have a narrative of truth. That will always triumph over deceit and lies, and therefore we should be taking those arguments to politicians, making our case, proving to them that wrongdoing is taking place, and then they have to act. And if they don't act, then we have to resort to the democratic process that we can all do, which is to vote them out.
Absolutely. And we're down to the last 2 minutes of the programme. So, Thomas, I just really want to ask you, what can be done? What can our viewers do in terms of writing letters to their own national parliaments, but also here to MEPs here in this European Parliament on the issue of funding the Palestinian Authority and its money to Palestinian prisoners, as well as the incitement to violence and terrorism we see in Palestinian education system?
Simon, I want to be very concrete. In the next few days, we will launch an online petition which calls upon the European Parliament to take the lead in stopping BDS. BDS is also a form of anti-Semitism. It's also a form of incitement when Israel is singled out, when Jewish businesses are being singled out for boycotts and sanctions. And I believe it's important that we take a moral leadership in Europe where we know where this all could lead, where it would eventually lead to. And so we often, we get excited in this studio, and the viewers may feel distance to what we are talking about. But I think the beauty of democracy is that every vote counts, every voice counts. Clicking on a petition to say, well, this is my way of showing my support for Israel is so pivotal. And obviously this is something you can just share within the family, at your workplace, in your church, and in your community. And this way we can have make an influence and have an impact. Let me also say that I'm so happy to finally meet Michael and work together with this brilliant man. And And you can tell he's been a successful member of the British Parliament. And I think together with Daphne and APA and other like-minded organizations, we can make a difference.
Absolutely. And Daphne, I give you the final word on the programme. For Israeli victims of terrorism, how must they feel when they realise that those terrorists who have committed these awful acts of terrorism in Israel are being paid by the Palestinian Authority through European taxpayers' money? How does that make them feel?
Honestly, as an Israeli, it's kind of sad to say that, but we kind of got used to it. We know who our neighbors are, we know who our enemies are, we know their way and how they act and how they raise the next generation. What really hurts for us as Israelis is the response of our friends outside of Israel, the world. The fact that they got used to it so much that they don't speak about it, that they support the Palestinians although they use violence, and basically by that they're rewarding the Palestinians and their actions instead of saying it's not legitimate and we're not standing behind that. And just one more thing, if I can, before we finish. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's two sides. Just a few months ago, here in the parliament, the MEP stood up and said, we do not agree with settlements. And we take something to show that, and they did the labeling, which is a democratic tool to say we don't agree with something, which is fine. We can agree, disagree on it, but the Palestinian has been using for violence for years now, and nothing has been done about that. And so that's basically the feeling of Israelis, that there is an unjust thing that is going on for years, and that the Palestinians are getting rewards for their actions.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining me on today's European Report. And I just want to thank you, all of you, for watching this programme here, the European Report from the European Parliament in Brussels. And I think it's important that we remember what role we can play in regards to our elective representatives, either here in the European Parliament or our own national parliaments. And that's to say that if we really want peace and reconciliation in the Middle East, then it's important that our governments do not fund or support terrorism in any way. So we have to make our money more accountable, so it actually goes to projects that will actually build stronger relations between the Israelis and Palestinians rather than actually tear them apart. Hello and welcome to the European Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the very important issue of what role the EU and what role can the European Parliament play in helping to foster closer political relations with the Israelis and the Palestinians, and we'll also be talking about the potential come September in the United Nations of the UN recognising a unilateral Palestinian state, and we're saying what implications will this have for the Middle East peace process. In today's programme I'm joined by Dafna Friedman, who's the Communications and Campaign Officer for the Israel Public Affairs, Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, partner in crime, and also we are joined by Michael McCann, who heads up Israel-Britain Alliance based in the UK. So welcome to the programme. Firstly, I'll start off with you, Thomas. The French government is very much involved in trying to kickstart the Middle East peace process, to try and push through an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the French government are trying to achieve, and why aren't they including Israel in these potential peace talks?
Well, thank you, Simon.
Pleasure.
It's great to be back again. And as you know, there was a peace summit planned for the 30th of May, which would have been 2 days ago. And it was postponed, and it's now scheduled for the 3rd of June on Friday. When it comes to the peace negotiations, I think the parameters are always clear. It's more a matter of bringing the parties to the same table, and obviously this is something that has not succeeded in the last few years. And it's understandable that the international community can have a certain level of frustration and try to do their utmost to kickstart the negotiations. Our concern, of course, is that you want to discuss peace in the Middle East without having the two parties at the table. And this was also the objection from the Prime Minister Netanyahu, to say that if we are to discuss peace, obviously, we want to be involved. This should not be a matter for the international community or the French government for that matter. Their game plan, of course, is to say that, listen, we need, as an international community, the quartet and the major players to come together to look again at ways of kickstarting, and then later in the autumn bring the parties together and try to reach an agreement or a timetable, during which an agreement would have been achieved. I think as far as the details are concerned, they're not very clear. A lot probably has to do with psychology as well. I think they feel it's good for the overall mode just to see that something is happening.
And Michael, you're here representing Israel-Britain Alliance. Can you tell us about this organisation? And also, do you think that the issue of the Israeli settlements is the key issue that is preventing an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I don't believe that settlements are the key issue, but I think that every year that passes where the Palestinians don't have a leader that will properly negotiate on their behalf makes it more difficult to find peace. Let's absolutely be clear about this. The idea of bringing forward anything through the United Nations without both parties sitting down at a table and thrashing out all the issues is plain stupid. I don't need to be diplomatic anymore, I'm not a politician. And let's be clear about another issue. The Palestinians refused a state in 1948. The Jordanians and the Egyptians refused to give the Palestinians a state from 48 to 67, and then taking it right through to 2000, when Bill Clinton was tantalisingly close. He said recently he nearly killed himself over giving the Palestinians a state. They refused it again. And let me bring it even more up to date for you. In 2014, when I met with Palestinian Authority ministers and when I met with the PLO, I put this to them. If the Clinton-Arafat-Ehud Barak deal was put back on the table with 2014 prices, would you accept the deal? Silence. And to quote someone from my heritage, Robert Louis Stevenson, who said, "The cruelest lies are often told in silence." And the cruelest lie was told in silence that day, and the people who benefit from the Palestinians not negotiating, or don't benefit, I should say, are the Palestinian people. So therefore, people have to understand the history of this dispute and why we've now got disputed territories, and bringing in other third parties to try and resolve it without the consent of the two parties, who are the most important participants in that discussion, is absolute madness.
Absolutely. And Dafna, I want to bring you on board on this one. As you're an Israeli, you have probably a better perspective than any of us, and particularly when it comes to Israelis, that the Israelis would do anything near enough for peace, make any dangerous territorial concessions in order to have a lasting peace with their Palestinian neighbours and other neighbours in the Middle East. What do you think are the key issues that are preventing an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
So as you say, yeah, I truly believe that Israelis want peace with all their hearts, and we are willing. We did it in the past. We gave a lot for peace, and all we care about is living in peace. I truly believe that Israelis will be willing also to give even part of settlements for the next peace. And it's regarding the last question that you were asking, are settlements what's keeping the peace process? I think it's very convenient, both to Palestinians and to other countries that do not support the peace process, to put the issue of settlements in the center. The EU is doing it. It did it a few months ago with labeling. The BDS movement is feeding that. It's very easy to take that and say this is why we don't have peace. But what people forget is the violence that we keep having from Palestinians, the rockets that we have from Gaza. People in Israel don't live in peace. We don't live a normal life. We don't go out to work and know that we will come back in the evening and everything will be fine. we live under terror attacks day by day by day. And the fact that just to come to negotiate, there are some things that we need to do, like stop building, it's absurd. To start negotiate, let's start negotiate. There shouldn't be anything that will stop us to start negotiate. But you can't come to start negotiate on something when one side is deciding on the other side to begin with. So that's the main issue, I think.
Yeah. And Thomas, the main political and legal framework for the peace negotiations has always been based on the Oslo Accord signed between the Israelis government and then the PLO, which became the Palestinian Authority. And the basis of those negotiations was that the EU would do everything they could to help foster good relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but essentially it was up to the two sides to make a decision in terms of how far the peace process progresses. Now, surely we've seen over the last decade or so, particularly since the last Intifada in 2000, that there has been a growing reluctance on Israel's side to concede land for peace, primarily out of fear of more terror attacks. And this is what we've seen in Gaza with Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, only to see Hamas take over, which is a proscribed terrorist organization. So isn't Europe in danger of missing the point of the actual framework by supporting more and more a demand by the Palestinian Authority to create a unilateral Palestinian state outside of the negotiated framework of the peace process?
Well, Simon, you said the word unilateral, and I think that's for me the key ingredient in this equation. And as the Oslo Accords clearly stated, there should be no unilateral actions from either side outside of the framework that was agreed. And this is, of course, what happened just a few years ago at the United Nations. When the Palestinians decided, instead of negotiating, instead of sitting down with the Israelis, to bring this to the United Nations General Assembly. And this is something that we always been objecting to as a European Coalition for Israel, and state the simple fact that there can only be peace through negotiations, exactly as Michael said. I also think that what you need to put in place is simple benchmarking. Yeah. And I think sometimes Europeans in particular, they live in a dream world, just assuming that the state can be birthed overnight, and that the Palestinian culture as it looks today, with all its incitement and violence, would be reap for statehood. And this is, to use the language of my friend here, this is clearly nonsense. I had a discussion with the famous historian Andrew Roberts, who said, statehood, yes, but let's use benchmarks. It may be a process of 10 years, it may be a process of 100 years. For Turkey to be accepted just as a EU member state, there was a process of 15 years for Turkey to adopt and become more like a European member state. So I think there needs to be more of a realistic approach to this whole issue of a two-state solution. And benchmarking for me is a crucial ingredient in this equation. And that's why we are so firm on stopping incitement. We want to see some clear signs that the Palestinians are willing to end this conflict once and for all, and to live in peace with their Israeli neighbors.
Yeah. And Michael, with your former colleagues in the House of Commons, particularly those on the left, are coming to a position where they feel that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has gone on far too long, and the overall answer is to actually concede and put pressure on Israel to actually create a Palestinian state on the ground and support a unilateral Palestinian state, regardless of the security situations that would cause. Now, isn't it a fact that it's thanks to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, that are actually keeping Mohammed Abbas in power at the moment, and that if Israel makes peace with Abbas today, tomorrow Israel could find that Hamas are in charge of the Palestinian Authority? And what we see with the situation with the rockets and missiles being fired over from Gaza, we would see that situation intensified over the whole nation of Israel. And so therefore, isn't it important that Western leaders and Western politicians look at the security implications on the ground before they decide to support a unilateral Palestinian state?
when you were referring to those people on the left, and it is an affliction of people on the extreme left in the UK, they have either willful ignorance or they're just ignorant of the history, how the whole situation came around in the first place. They just simply don't understand it. For me, the prize of statehood was always something that would be available after border security, refugees, incidentally refugees from both sides, because remember, nearly 1 million Jewish people were expelled from Arab and Muslim lands and relocated to Israel, but they don't get the benefits that UNRWA offers to the generations of refugees that have been created way back since the 1940s. So, you know, the people who put forward these arguments don't understand the realpolitik on the ground. In order for peace to have a chance, first of all, we need some tough love given to the Palestinians. And the tough love is this. In Northern Ireland, all the groups had to sign up to the Mitchell Principles, which committed all the parties to exclusively peaceful means of ending political disputes. We need that in terms of the Palestinian Authority. And we also need a decent Palestinian leadership, brave enough to take forward plans for their people. Because at the moment, I heard it described to me recently as Noah's Ark. We've got two of everything. We've got Fatah and Hamas. We've got the two different views in terms of how they should participate in peace. Fatah claim that they're interested in peace. Hamas want Israel wiped off of the face of the world. So that's the difficulties that we face. The Palestinians have never been blessed with a leadership that will properly represent their views, because the vast majority of Palestinians want peace. And going back to the British Parliament, the vote that took place in October 2014 was utterly, utterly worthless. All they try to do is they're participating in a process that Hamas would support, which is salami slicing their way to the conclusion which they want without offering any compromises. And the key compromise that they won't offer is they won't offer non-violence. And they need tough love. They need to be told that we cannot support you if you continue down this path. You're damaging your people's future, and every year that passes, the issues become more difficult to resolve. The issues of settlements, the issue of where the lines will be drawn, the issue of refugees. I was talking to someone at APAC recently in Washington, where there was a fourth generation claiming that it was a Palestinian refugee. It's utter madness. The UNHCR exists to stop refugees existing, to repatriate them to new countries where they can start a new life. UNRWA is the only organisation which we fund as taxpayers, which creates more refugees every year. It is madness. And really someone needs to grab this issue by the scruff of the neck and say, enough, let's have a sensible discussion and reach some sensible resolutions to these problems.
Absolutely. And Dafna, I mean, when we look at Israel's if we look at the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli Parliament, and particularly the Israeli government, it was only since 1997 that a government of the centre-left has taken power in Israel, as Ehud Barak's government. And there's a growing concern, isn't there, amongst ordinary Israelis now, that Israel is living in an increasingly dangerous neighbourhood thanks to the Arab Spring that's become the Arab Winter, with the rise of Islamic extremism right throughout the region. Israel has to deal with now almost a civil war on Israel's northern border with Syria. And also we're seeing the rise of ISIS as well in the Middle East, as well as Israel having to deal with Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and who knows what other Iranian-sponsored terrorist organisations are in the region. So can you explain to us really the security dangers for Israel in terms of accepting Europe's proposal of allowing the creation of an independent Palestinian state outside a negotiated agreement?
Well, there's so many problems. I don't know where to start, but Israel is such a tiny country. We have, wherever you look, we have enemies, except of Jordan, which we have kind of good peace with them, and Egypt. We have danger from the north with Lebanon and Syria, of course, and as you mentioned, ISIS. And by the way, ISIS, we can feel it within Israel, because some of Arab Israelis are actually joining ISIS, and that's the latest phenomenon. So we feel danger every day. And with the Palestinian, this is one of the reasons that we even started having some kind of wall between us, or some kind of gates that we can pass things through or decide who comes in or who comes out. Because even when I was a kid at the early 80s, there wasn't such a thing, and the Palestinian could come and work in Israel, come back. We had a good relationship. Some of the people I know would go to their markets and buy and come back. All started with the Intifada, and it escalated and escalated until what we are experiencing today. And as you said before, it's really hard when you're from outside to understand the reality on the ground. And I understand the willingness of all the world for peace, and everybody really wanting to push for it, and the French and the Arab Leagues and everybody else. And it's good. It comes from a good place, but it's really, really difficult to decide on stuff when you're far away. And whoever wants to initiate something in the Middle East and in Israel specifically needs to come, needs to see the things in his own eyes, needs to learn about it and about the history, as you said, and to talk to politicians and to the people on the ground. Otherwise, you cannot do it by remote control. It does not work.
And Thomas, when it comes down to the kind of issue of Israel, shouldn't Europe make better relations with Israel, primarily because Israel shares the same values as Europe? It is the foundation of our Judeo-Christian heritage. Also, that Israel is not the problem in the Middle East, that Israel is the solution. It is a beacon of light in a growing, dark and dangerous region. And Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East and the only place where Christianity is actually growing. So isn't it important that maybe our European leaders examine the good role that Israel plays in the Middle East in actually confronting this violent terrorism extremism that we're seeing that's sweeping right across the region?
Absolutely, Simon, and one would think that this would be crystal clear after the recent attacks in Paris and Brussels, and we realize what type of enemy Israel is facing, as Dafna says, every day. And this is only now becoming, clear for us in Europe. We had a conference just the other week where we basically made two statements. One is that Israeli innovations really is a key to promoting peace in the region. It's something that Europe can benefit from, but also more interestingly, Palestinians. And there was a similar conference just yesterday where it was displayed how Israeli innovations are fostering integration in Israel, how Arabs and Palestinians can be helped to start their own companies. And this way really bring the two parties together, not through BDS, not through demonization or trying to isolate and build walls and label Israeli goods. That's not the way. So I think the solutions are very clear, and we need, and I think especially as non-Jews, we have a responsibility in Europe to raise this point and make the choices very clear, to say, either we are looking at more of development as we see in the Middle East. The alternatives are clear, but there is one exception, and that is Israel. As you said, a beacon of light, the only democracy in that region. And it's not rocket science to decide on what side should Israel stand on that issue.
Yeah, and Michael, as a former British member of the British Parliament, you visited high-ranking officials in Lebanon, in Jordan, as well as the Palestinian Authority, and also in Israel. What do you say that Israel has that Israel's Arab neighbours don't have in terms of democracy, freedom of press, freedom of religion?
Everything that we have in our daily lives. We can turn on the television or the radio, and you can hear a vibrant political debate. You can hear people contradicting government ministers. You can hear people challenging government ministers. Israel's a democracy. Israel is entitled to be criticised, just in the same way Britain can be criticised, France can be criticised, and Germany can be criticised. The USA can be criticised. Democracies make mistakes because they're democracies, and that's the important part. But let me tell you, the BDS movement is anti-Palestinian, it's anti-Israeli, and it's anti-peace. and quite frankly, the cause that they claim to represent, to help the Palestinian people, is done a massive disservice by what they're attempting to do. The people in the UK might not know that when they collect a prescription from their doctor, there's a 1 in 6 chance that that prescription, that drug, will be made by Teva Pharmaceuticals based in Israel. And there's loads of examples, breakthroughs in Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, things that my parents, grandparents, people across Europe will benefit from. We should be celebrating Israel every single day, and we should be thankful that we have Israel as a vibrant democracy, which is quite frankly, if you look at it, if you look at the map, is an arc which is quite frankly holding the Middle East together. If that wasn't there, the whole thing would collapse, and it would be even worse for every country in the world.
Yeah. And Dafna, how can Europe play a role in helping to foster closer ties between Israel and our neighbours?
I think Europe can be an amazing actor in the region. It has the power, it has the means, and it has Europe just needs to be given an equal way of treating both countries. That's the only thing it should do. Because right now, as I said earlier, we had the labeling issue for Israel against settlements, which is fine and it's acceptable. You can argue if it's wrong or right. But nothing has been done to the Palestinian by transferring money, aid money for the Palestinian. And by that, you're basically giving them the wrong message that, and this is the feeling among Israelis, that Europe is right now for the Palestinian. They support the Palestinian more than they support the Israelis and their rights for security. So I do think there is a place for EU to be a player in the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. I think Israeli would like the EU to take part. But right now they don't trust the EU that much because of the step that I mentioned.
Yeah. So program's come to an end. So I just want to thank you all for being my guests here on the European Report in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you all for watching today's European Report that is recorded in the European Parliament here in Brussels. And as we've been discussing the peace process, it's important that we actually get behind Israel and realise that Israel is the beacon of light and the beacon of liberty in the Middle East. And by supporting Israel, we're supporting the forces of freedom and democracy. And our European leaders would do well to take that into account rather than supporting a unilateral Palestinian state outside of a negotiated agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, as that won't bring peace, but instead it will create more conflict and war. So I want to thank you for watching today's European Report.